and thanks to our interpreters. Um, and thank you everyone for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Um, really glad to be here with everyone this morning to talk about media relationships. And I really am stressing in this presentation the relationships aspect, because working with the media is all about developing a relationship. It's getting to know the journalists, um, uh, sometimes in very deep ways, so that you really understand what their work is all about, um, what their personalities are like, and how to best engage with them. And I'm starting with this slide because many of you may remember Tadesse did an interview during the Paris Plastics Treaty INC in the spring for CNN. And this was a global interview which lasted about 7 or 8 minutes, which is a long time on a major media network. And this came about all because of a relationship that Bjorn had developed with a CNN journalist who we met almost a year ago. And we stayed in touch with her, kept her updated on IPEN's work. We let her know IPEN would be active at the Plastics Treaty negotiations. And when we attended the meetings, she reached out to us because of that long relationship. So it's just a nice a little success story that shows how important building these relationships can be. I wanted to tell you this story to give you another view of a media relationship. So the San Francisco Chronicle is the largest newspaper in the Bay Area, and Jane Kay was their most important environmental writer. So when I was working on GMOs with Greenpeace, it was important for me to get to know Jane. Jane called me up one day and said, I'm doing a front page story on GMOs and I need your help. And for about a week, every day I worked with Jane on the phone. I gave her lots of background information. I gave her Greenpeace reports. I gave her scientific studies. I connected her with many people in the movement against GMOs, many scientists and academics and activists who she could talk to. And about a week later, her story came out. It was a front page story with 2 full pages inside the newspaper. So it was a very long story, very detailed story. It was an excellent story. It never mentioned Greenpeace and never quoted me. Now, I wasn't very happy about this. In fact, all of my friends who I talked to about it, I told them how annoyed and upset I was. But I never said anything about it to Jane. In fact, I sent her an email and I said, that's a terrific story. You did a great job. It's a very important story. Thank you for doing it. And over the next 15 years or so, Jane did many other Greenpeace stories. And when I worked for Center for Environmental Health, she did many, many more CEH stories. And we always had a great relationship. And so the lesson is, it's just business. It's not personal. Don't take it personally if somebody doesn't quote you or doesn't include you in their stories. Maybe it wasn't even their option. It might have been their editor who cut you out of the story. That's happened to me many times. It's really the most important thing is to keep the relationship. If the journalist is doing good stories on your issue, then the most important thing is to keep that relationship strong. It's different if the journalist does a lousy story. If the journalist does a story that's antithetical to your issues, that's wrong, that shows your work in a poor light, that's different. That's something that you can, take up with them. But otherwise, it's just business. So just try to keep that in mind. I also want to talk a little bit about your audience, because I often see nonprofits say, well, one of our audience is the media. We're going to, get our work out to the media. And it's obviously very important to get your work out to the media, but the media is not your audience. The media is a tool that you're using to reach your audience. And like I said, it's a business relationship. So journalists need you just as you need them. So you need the media to reach your audience. They have a much bigger platform than you have. A large newspaper, a large television outlet, uh, a radio station, even online outlets. Uh, those are ways that you can reach your audience. So you have to remember your messaging is not for journalists. You definitely want to uh, in, engage journalists and convince them that uh, your work is important, but you're not trying to tailor your message to the journalist. You're tailoring your message to your audience. So try to keep that in mind as well. Obviously, when you do media outreach, the first thing you need to do is figure out how are you going to find journalists, and especially the right kinds of journalists. Um, so there, you may have a large newspaper, a large television outlet, and you want to connect with them. How do you find the journalist who's the right person? Well, there are a lot of different things you want to look at, but mostly you want to see what kinds of stories are they writing? Are they writing stories that are similar to the work that you're doing? So, in the US, journalists talk about the beat that they're on. I'm on the health beat. I'm on the environment beat. I'm on the business beat. That just means the area that they're working in. And you want to find the journalists that fit the stories that you want to get out there. Um, a lot of our work is mostly environment reporters and health reporters. And you might want to tailor your stories a little differently depending on if somebody mostly covers the environment or mostly covers health. But otherwise, the story is the same. Um, our stories are also often of interest to business reporters because business reporters follow the companies, the chemical companies, the plastics companies. They follow the industries. If you're doing stories around lead paint or mercury, they'll be following those industries. And business reporters can be very helpful in getting our messages out to different audiences and audiences that can be very influential. Um, so I always suggest people don't overlook business reporters. And then there's another kind of reporter that can be very helpful, and those are investigative journalists. So these are people who tend to work on much longer timelines. So, a lot of journalists, they have very tight deadlines. They have to have a story in every day or maybe a couple of stories a week. Whereas an investigative reporter might do a story that they work on for 6 months or even a year before they actually have the story out for the public. So investigative journalists can be very helpful when we have long timelines and we know, in a few months we're going to be doing testing and we're pretty confident that that testing is going to have interesting results. Uh, let's stay in touch, and I'll let you know as our work develops what it's looking like. I've worked with many investigative reporters who find uh, testing work very interesting, product testing or environmental testing. And often they've said, hey, we want to do testing too. They'll do their own testing kind of side by side with our testing. And that can be very powerful because, not only are they invested in the story and having their own testing, but their test data can be combined with our test data, and we can have a more thorough data set at the end. Finding journalists can be tricky these days because not everybody has their emails posted, but many journalists do. And you can often find their emails on the website of their outlet. Twitter is often a good place for finding journalists and their contact information. If they don't have their email in their Twitter bio, you can reach out on Twitter. You can just direct message them on Twitter and reach out that way. There's an online database called RocketReach, which has a database of journalists and other contacts. You can often get a few free searches before you have to sign up for paid searches. But just use different emails and you can get plenty more free searches. That's what I do. And then there are subscription databases that you have to pay for. So uh, uh, one is called Muck Rack. There's another called Cision. They can be quite expensive. So if you're not using them often, I would not recommend them. But if you do end up doing a lot of media work, they can be very handy. As I said before, getting to know the journalists is the most important thing. Um, so once you've made contact with a reporter, you've identified they're the right reporter, they're in the health beat or they're in the environment beat. You know, you understand that they they do stories that are in your area. Now you want to look at what's their approach to these stories. Do they have a progressive approach? Do they look like they're sympathetic to our issues? Are they concerned about health? Are they concerned about the environment? Or do they have a more conservative, maybe pro-business approach? You really want to look at a few of their stories and see how they take it. Many journalists appear to be very neutral. They have both sides in their story. They don't seem to take a position, but usually you can tell if you look at a few stories, kind of where they align, and that's important for you to know because when you approach them, you want to know where they're coming from. If they're very progressive, very left leaning, they're very concerned about health and the environment, you'll approach them differently than somebody who's more neutral or conservative. So it's very important to know those things about journalists. Are they very interested in business scandals? Are they very interested in, corporate misdoing? If those are interests for them, those are things that are important for you to know. So the more that you can get to know about them, the better it helps. When I was at Center for Environmental Health, there were probably 7 or 8 journalists around the country who all had similar backgrounds and jobs. So they were all consumer reporters. They would report on stories about harmful products. And CEH did a lot of product testing, a lot of testing of toys and children's products. All of these journalists were women and they were all parents. And it was great to know that about them because they all approached their work, especially when it came to children's products, not just as journalists, but as parents. And every time I talked to them, I would say, "Hey, how's your little one? They must be 3 or 4 years old by now. Are they in preschool? How are they doing?" And getting to know them at that level really helped them understand that approaching our issues as a parent helped them do their work, that they didn't have to separate themselves. A lot of times journalists say, well, I have to be just neutral. I just have to be a journalist. And these sort of small group of reporters, they understood after a while that their interest as parents was helping them make better stories for their audience, because a lot of their audience are parents too. Their audience wants to know which are the safe products for my kids. So they were very emotional stories. They were very visceral stories. And it really helped that I got to know that about them, that was something that really resonated with them when we would have those kinds of stories. So now when you've identified the reporters, you've gotten to know them a little bit, now you want to reach out to them. And there are several different ways that you're going to reach out to reporters, depending on what time it is in your timeline of your story and in the timeline of your work and where you are in the relationship with the reporter. So some of the most common ways you'll reach out are called a press pitch, a press advisory, a press release, and then just an update, just a little bit of informal news update. I'm going to go over all of these, but I'm going to start with the last one. I'm going to start with the update. Once you've gotten to know reporters a little bit, you want to just keep in touch with them informally, even when you don't always have news going on. A couple of times a month, just send them a little email about what you're working on. And ideally, if you can find some information that you think they wouldn't have come across in their day-to-day work, because we're all working very intensely and very deeply on issues that are not in the news every day. And you might come across an interesting study, a study about pesticides or a study about plastics, whatever it is you're working on, that didn't hit the mainstream news, but it's an interesting study. Or maybe you heard something an academic talked about at a conference that was really interesting. You think that academic would be a good person for the journalist to know. You want to send a little note to the journalist and say, "Hey, here's what we're working on. By the way, I came across this really interesting thing. I thought you might be interested in it." They might not do a story about it, but if it's news they haven't heard of, if it's something that fits with their work that they haven't heard of, they're going to be grateful to you that you pointed it out to them. They're going to start to consider you a source for information in the field, not just a source for information about your specific organization, your specific work, but a source for information about the field. If a journalist feels like they can go to you not just for news, but for information about the field, about information that you might say, I don't really work on this, but I know so and so who works on it. Being helpful to journalists in that way is one of the best ways to build a relationship. Uh, you know, Over the years, I've talked to journalists probably hundreds of times where I knew I wasn't going to get quoted in their story. I knew that my organization wasn't going to be named in their story because it just wasn't something that we were directly involved in a way that we would fit in the story. But I knew people in the field who were the right people for them to talk to. And I would connect them with those people, make an email introduction, give them the phone numbers, give them the emails. And journalists would just appreciate that. And when a time came that they had a story that fit with our organization, they would come to me first because they knew, I had done them favors. They wanted to repay those favors. So giving them these little updates, sending them a little bit of news every couple of weeks, just to keep them, just to let them know that you're keeping them in mind. It's a great way to keep those relationships going. Now, the next three slides have a ton of text. Don't be concerned about the text because I'm just trying to show you the format. So the text is not really important. It's just the format that I want to show you. So on this slide, this is what I call, oh, sorry, wait, I think I got ahead. Sorry, there. So this slide is what I call a press pitch. This is an email that you'll send to a reporter when you want to let them know, I have some news and I think you might be interested in it. Let me know if you're interested. So this is not a press release. It doesn't have a lot of information. This screen that you're seeing is the entire pitch. It's just 2 paragraphs and then a line that says, let me know if you want to know more. A press pitch is really important because journalists don't have a lot of time. And most journalists are getting dozens or more press releases every day. And if you just send them the press release right away, they're probably going to read the first paragraph if you're lucky. And then they're going to go on to the next thing. So the press pitch kind of takes the place of sending a press release by giving them a very short summary with just the highlights of what your news is about. And it kind of teases them a little. It doesn't really tell them enough to let them do a story. So if they're interested, they have to come back to you. So you're not going to include your press release with the press pitch. You're not going to include any supplemental materials. You're not going to include a study or a report. You're only going to send the pitch because you want them to come back to you. If they don't come back to you, it's probably because they're not interested. If they do come back to you, now you know you've got them on the hook. They're interested enough that they emailed you back. They want to know more. Now you can send your study. Now you can send your press release. Now you can set up an interview with an expert. So the press pitch is a really important starter when you have some news, just to get them interested. You can see the yellow at the top. If possible, look at their work before you send them the press pitch and see if there's anything they've done recently that fits with what you're going to send them. Because if they did a story a few days ago or even a couple of weeks ago that's similar, they'll often like to do a follow-up story. And you can say, hey, that was a really good story you did. We have a story that really connects in this way, and I think you might be interested as a follow-up. So always try to look before you send your press pitch. Is there anything I can hook this to? Anything they've done recently that I can hook this to? And that can really help you, get into their email box. The next slide is about a press advisory. So a lot of times groups will have an event. They'll have a briefing for the press, or we'll have a protest you want the reporters to come to. You'll have a meeting with decision makers, and you'll want reporters to be outside the meeting afterwards to meet you and find out what was talked about. Anytime you have an event, you don't want to send a press release right away. First, you want to send the press advisory. And the press advisory should go out at least a week before the event. And the press advisory has a very specific format. So you see at the top, there's a headline, then there's contact information, and then there's the who, what, where, and when. And the press advisory, when a reporter gets this in their email box, they know right away it's an event, and they know right away, I've got all the details at the top. I know where to go, I know when I have to be there, I know what's going to happen, and I know who's going to be speaking. That's the most important part of the press advisory, is just to get this into the reporters' hands. So if they want to attend, they can put it into their calendars right away, and they know exactly what's going to happen. You notice at the top, I put photo opportunity. So if you're doing something colorful, this was the press advisory for when we had the banner at the INC. You want to put photo opportunity at the top. If you're going to do something very colorful and very clever, you might even put, colorful signs, banners, and protest. Describe the activity a little bit so they know, oh, I need to bring a photographer, or I need to bring a videographer. For print reporters, even print publications these days do a lot of video. So you want to let them know right at the top, a little bit about what's going to happen, so they can prepare to be there. The last slide is a press release, and this is just the start of a press release. So again, when I look at a press release, I always look at the format first. And again, it has the same kind of style as the press advisory, but it's a little bit different to let reporters know it's in a release. So at the top, you always want to put for immediate release. That lets the reporters know this is news, this is happening today. You can write about it now. You can put your stories out now. You always want to have the date and your contact information, a short headline, and the first paragraph is most important. The first paragraph should be short. It should have 2 or 3 sentences at the most, and it should have one idea. The main idea that you want reporters to write about should be the first paragraph. I have too often seen many nonprofits put out press releases where the first paragraph is 12 sentences and has 6 ideas. If a reporter gets that in their email box, they're not going to read it. It's too much to handle. You need to get the one idea in the first paragraph, because that's how their stories are. If you've read any newspaper in the world, 99% of newspaper stories start with a short paragraph that has one idea. And that's how your press releases should be. Even if it's for television and other outlets, their stories tend to be, here's the idea of the story, here's what we're going to tell you. It's good storytelling, and it's good writing to keep your first paragraph short and one idea. So the first paragraph has one idea and maybe one data point. So one data point from your work that really jumps out, you can put that in the first paragraph. Notice also there's a quote. I put the quote in bold, but the quote should also be pretty high up in the press release. And your quote is just something that the representative of your organization, the expert who did the study that you're talking about, it's something that you want reporters to use in their stories as a quote from your organization. So that should also be high up in your press release. If not the second or third paragraph, then it should be as high up as you can get it. And then notice there are bullet points further down. It's good to, if you have very dense data, if you're sending out a press release about a study or about a very complicated policy, to put a few bullet points in so they know, here are some of the keys to this story. It's a good way to kind of alert reporters that, you know, there's some keys of the story that they can pull out and use for their stories. Now, I want to tell you about a couple of different ways to send out press releases. So as I said, at the top of this press release, it says for immediate release. That lets the reporter know, you know, hey, this is news. We can use this now. There are two other ways to do it that are a little bit different. So one is giving a reporter an exclusive story. So an exclusive means you're going to give your story to only one reporter ahead of time. So maybe a week before you're going to release the news to the public and to the wider list of journalists, you have one, if there's one journalist who you know and trust, and you know they're going to be interested in the story, you can say, hey, do you want this as an exclusive? You're the only one who knows it ahead of time that we're going to put this out next week. You can have it for the front page of your newspaper. You can have it for the lead of your TV show. We think it's an important story, and we thought you might want it. So exclusives you should do only when you have really important news that you think really stands out. If you have test results that are really shocking, really terrible test results, you know, test results that show a real health problem. If you have information about a government scandal or a corporate scandal that others don't have, those are the kinds of things you want to give out as exclusives. And again, you only want to give it to a trusted reporter and only to one reporter. Now, if the reporter says, yeah, I don't have time, I can't do it, then you can say, okay, I understand. I'm going to go to another outlet. I'm going to go to another media outlet. Now, the reporter might say, oh, I have a colleague at our newspaper who could do it. That's fine. But if they say, yeah, our paper just can't cover it, then you can tell them, I'm going to go to another outlet. And if you have a second journalist who you trust at another media outlet, then you could try them. So you have to do it one at a time because you're promising them that they're the only one who are going to get it. So you can't go to two or three at a time, because if two of them come back and say, yes, we want it, now you're going to have to disappoint one of them and say, sorry, I already gave it to somebody else, right? So you have to do it one at a time. You have to be patient. Give yourself 10 days or a week. So you say, hey, I'm offering it to you today, but you got to let me know in 24 hours or I'm going to offer it to somebody else, right? You have to give them a little bit of time to come back to you, but then you can move on. So that's basically how exclusives work. The other way you can do it is what's called giving the reporters an embargo. So if you give the reporters an embargo, it means you're giving it to everybody. You're giving it ahead of time, but they can't report on it until the day the embargo lifts, and you choose that day. So again, when you give out your press release on embargo, you have to give it to reporters who you trust. You don't want to give it to a reporter you've never worked with, because you don't know, maybe they're not going to acknowledge the embargo and they'll put the work out before you're ready. Ram, did you want to ask a question? Oh, I think you're probably on mute. Maybe we'll just hold questions till the end. Uh, I'm really close to the end, by the way, so we'll get to questions very soon. So yeah, so with embargoes, you want to make sure it's reporters you trust, and let them know exactly the embargo date and the embargo time. It used to be the timing wasn't as important to reporters, but now with the 24/7 news cycle, where everybody's reporting all the time, you really have to tell reporters, our embargo ends on Monday at midnight. You know, Tuesday at 12:01 a.m. you can put your reports up, and there are reporters who will post at 12:01 on their websites. So yeah, that's basically how embargoes work. It just means you're letting reporters know, especially when you have complicated studies that you're putting out. If you have work that you think the reporters will need to make a lot of phone calls, they'll need to call the other side, they'll need to call government officials, they'll want to talk to other people about it. you want to give them time to do all that. Now with embargoes, it's tricky because if they're going to do reporting, you have to let them understand what is and is not okay. So for example, I've let reporters know about a corporate scandal, and they've said to me, well, when can I call the company? And I've said, you can call the company 24 hours before you post your story, but I'd prefer that you don't call them before that. So, the idea is I don't want to give, if I've got a scandal about a company, I don't want to give them a week to prepare, uh, their message on what we found out about them, right? I want to give them 24 hours or less. So you have to be a little tricky if you have that kind of information in your embargo. But usually we're just using it for more complicated studies, more complicated data, stuff where we think it will help the reporters do the story if they have time to sit with the information and the data and use that for their stories. So that's basically the last thing I had. I think Justin may have shown you this slide yesterday. This is just a document we put together that has a lot of resources and tools, not just for media relationships, but for social media, for graphic design, images. Yeah, all of this is uh, a lot of information that can help you in your communications work in general. And we're always adding new things. And if you have new resources that you think are useful to add to this, please let me know, and we'll take a look and add to that. So thank you all. Definitely stay in touch. Email's the best way to reach me at any time. And yeah, I'm looking forward to your questions.
May I?